I used to work as a security guard at a shopping mall for about 2 years, and the overnight shifts were the ones that got to me the most. You'd think a completely empty mall at 3 a.m. would just be boring. But there's something deeply unsettling about a place that's built to hold thousands of people being completely silent and empty. My job was simple enough: walk the perimeter, check the doors, make sure nothing was out of the ordinary, and log everything in a little notebook. The mall was 3 floors and had a food court on the 2nd floor, a big open atrium in the center, and a parking garage attached to the east side. My shift partner Marcus would always take the upper floors while I did the ground level and garage. We had radios, but the signal was garbage inside the concrete parking structure. So we'd established a system where if either of us needed help, we'd just drive to the entrance and honk twice. It was a stupid system looking back on it, but for a year and a half nothing ever happened, so we got comfortable. One night in November I was doing my sweep of the parking garage around 2:30 in the morning. The garage was completely empty as usual, at least that's what I thought. I was on the 3rd level of the garage, walking toward the far end where the stairwell was, and I noticed that the elevator was running. I could hear the mechanical hum of it moving, and I watched the little floor indicator light above the elevator doors ticking up, and then back down and then up again, like someone was going between floors. I wasn't scared yet. I figured maybe maintenance had left something running, or there was some kind of malfunction. So I pressed the button and waited for it to come down. When the doors opened, the elevator was completely empty, which again wasn't necessarily alarming. But then I noticed something on the floor of the elevator. There were wet footprints going into the elevator and then stopping, like whoever had walked in had just ceased to exist in the center of the elevator floor. It wasn't raining that night. It hadn't rained in days. I radioed Marcus and asked him if he'd been in the elevator. He hadn't. He was on the 3rd floor of the mall, checking the cinema entrance. I told him I'd keep an eye on the elevator and continued my sweep. When I came back around to check on it, maybe 15 minutes later, the doors were open and the footprints were gone. I don't mean dried up, I mean they had moved. They were now a trail leading out of the elevator toward the north stairwell. I followed them, and they just stopped in the middle of the stairwell landing. I called Marcus down and we both looked at those footprints, and neither of us could explain it. We checked every door, every exit, nothing was breached. We never figured out where those footprints came from or where they went. I put it in the log, and our manager told us the elevator had been acting up, and that water sometimes pools in it from a leak in the roof of the garage. But the roof above that elevator was completely solid. No leak anywhere. I checked. I left that job 8 months later for unrelated reasons, but I still think about those footprints. Before I started working security at the mall, I had a job doing overnight stocking at a big box grocery store. You know, the kind that never actually closes, but goes into a sort of dim overnight mode where they cut half the lights and a small crew comes in to stock the shelves for the next day. There were usually 6 of us on the crew, and we'd work in different aisles while the store stayed open to the handful of customers who came in at those hours. It was mostly fine, repetitive work, and I got really good at zoning out and just moving through the motions. One night our crew was shorter than usual. 2 people had called out sick, so it was just me and 2 other guys named Devin and Pete. We were spread across the entire store, which was a lot of square footage for 3 people. Pete was in the frozen section, Devin was doing produce, and I had the dry goods aisles in the middle of the store. It was around 3:15 in the morning, and the store had that particular quality of stillness it gets where you can hear the refrigerated section humming from across the building. I was working on restocking soup cans when I heard footsteps coming down my aisle. I looked up expecting a late-night shopper, but the aisle was empty. I went back to work and heard them again, this time closer and slower. I stood up and walked to the end of the aisle and looked both ways along the main corridor of the store and saw nothing. I assumed it was one of the other guys and called out "hey" and got nothing back. I radioed Devin, who said he was in the back of the produce section and hadn't moved. And Pete confirmed he was still in frozen. I went back to my aisle feeling a little uneasy, and that's when I noticed that several of the cans I had just stocked on the middle shelf had been moved. They were now on the bottom shelf, not knocked off, not fallen, placed carefully on the bottom shelf in the same arrangement I had put them on the middle shelf. I stared at those cans for a long time. I want to make it very clear that I had been the only person in that section of the store for the last hour and a half. I had not put those cans on the bottom shelf. I called Devin and Pete over and showed them, and none of us could explain it. We checked the security footage later. There was a camera at the far end of my aisle that covered most of it, and the footage showed me stocking the shelves and then walking away to investigate the noise. And when I came back, the cans were already on the bottom shelf. The footage didn't show anyone moving them, so the angle wasn't perfect. There was a blind spot right where the cans were. But still, the store manager said it was probably just the vibration from a delivery truck outside shaking the shelves. But those cans were in a neat, organized row on the bottom shelf, not scattered on the floor the way they'd fall if they were shaken loose. I know what I saw, and I know what I stocked. None of us talked much about it after that night, but I noticed Devin started taking his breaks in groups of 2 or 3 after that, never alone. There was one more incident at that store that bothered me even more than the soup cans. But that one's harder to talk about because it didn't happen to me. It happened to Pete. He quit 2 weeks after the soup can incident without giving much of a reason at the time. But I ran into him about a year later, and he told me what had happened to him that same night. While Devin and I were dealing with the soup cans, Pete was in the frozen section and said he had seen a woman standing at the end of the aisle. Just standing there, facing the freezer doors with her back to him. He said he called out to her twice, and she didn't respond. So he started walking toward her, and she just walked around the corner. When he got there, she was gone. He checked the entire frozen section, and she was nowhere. He thought maybe she had gone through the emergency exit at the back of the frozen aisle. But when he checked the door, the alarm was still armed and undisturbed. It would have gone off if that door had opened. Pete said the thing that bothered him wasn't that she disappeared. It was that when he first saw her, she appeared to be looking at her own reflection in the dark glass of the freezer doors. And her reflection wasn't doing what she was doing. The years I spent working nights at those places were honestly formative in a weird way. I became a lot more observant, a lot more sensitive to things that were slightly off, the things that don't quite make sense. I picked up another overnight job after the grocery store, this time at a self-storage facility out on the edge of town. It was run by an older couple, and they needed someone to be on site overnight a few nights a week. The facility had a small office with a cot, a bathroom, and a window that looked out over the rows of storage units. The job was dead simple. Answer the phone in case anyone needed emergency access. Log any activity. Stay until 6 a.m. when the owner came in. I'd done maybe a dozen shifts without incident and was starting to feel like I'd found the most boring job in the world. And then one Thursday night, someone started using a unit at the far end of the lot, Unit 114, at around 1 a.m. I could see the light on under the door from the office window, which meant someone had accessed the unit. I checked the access log and no one had badged in since 9 p.m. I wasn't sure what to make of that, but I put my jacket on and walked out to check it out. The lights were motion activated inside each unit, so if there was a light on, it meant something was moving in there. I knocked on the unit door and said hello, and the light went off. Whatever had been moving in there stopped. When I tried the lock, it was still secured. Locked from the outside, which meant either no one was in there, or someone had locked themselves in from the inside, which made no sense. I logged it and went back to the office. A little after 2 a.m., the light was on again. I went back out, and this time I stood outside the unit for a minute, just listening. I could hear something inside, a low, rhythmic sound that I couldn't place. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't an animal. It was something I'd never heard before, and haven't heard since. I knocked again, louder this time, and said I was security, and I was going to open the unit. The sound stopped immediately. I called the owner, who told me to write it down and check in the morning. In the morning, the owner came in, and we opened Unit 114 together. It was rented to a man who turned out to be a contractor who used it to store equipment. So the unit was completely ordinary. Saws, drills, coils of wire, stacked lumber. Nothing out of place, nothing that could have made that sound. Nothing that could have triggered the motion sensor lights on its own. The owner asked me to describe the sound, and I did my best. And he went quiet for a second, and then told me he'd heard reports of the same sound from a couple of the overnight guys before me, both of whom had stopped working there after whatever they experienced in that facility. I'm still not sure what it was I heard in Unit 114, and I'm not sure I want to know. What I do know is that there's a specific kind of dread you feel at 2 a.m. in a place that's supposed to be empty, when something makes itself known without ever showing itself to you. Start to understand why the overnight guys before me stopped showing up.